Hi, Misha here, and it's another Blackbox time, and this one is going to be a loose, very, very loose movie review critique. I'm not big into movies, it's not my field, not my thing, just a person, but since I have been doing quite a few Star Wars ship videos and Walker videos lately, questions have come up about my favorites, what I think about this or that, so on and so forth. So on this one, I want to talk about The Last Jedi. Now, you might say this is in defense of it, but if so, it's backhanded compliments. Everything is relative. So yeah, all I ask is just hang with me to the end. That's all. But let me first explain the title. That actually came a month or two back talking with Jay, and we're talking about the sequels. And I basically said, look, they're all turds floating in toilet bowl. Let's say that you have 3 turds all floating there, and you have to eat one of them. Well, I guess I would point to the one that has a peanut in it, because I do like peanuts. Meaning, even though it's a big pile of shit, it's the only one of the 3 big piles of shit with something in there that I like. It'd probably put me off peanuts for the rest of my life, but there you go. And that's exactly how The Last Jedi kind of is to me. When I compare it with Force Awakens and really Rise of Skywalker, yeah, I guess from a film making point of view, I would say it's the best. And I have several reasons. And just kind of will outline them here in kind of Mad Libs type thing, thinking out loud mostly. And it's interesting because some films you watch for the first time, either you don't like them or you're meh, but over time they grow on you. I think the prequels are that way, frankly. And I did watch all those in the theater. Lots of films are that way, frankly. Other films go the other direction. And as time goes on, you appreciate them, like them less and less. That's definitely how I feel about Force Awakens. As far as Rise of Skywalker, I, like everyone else, had basically no interest. And that is, of course, the fault of The Last Jedi. But not so much the film itself as what it revealed about the new direction Star Wars is going. The thing about George Lucas, we knew who he was, where he was going. He was wrong, but he was always someone with a strong vision, a strong drive, who would only really make a film when he thought he had something to say. Now, what he might want to say, it might not have been great, whatever, but at least he had something he wanted to say, a message. And that's really why the prequels have worked out. They were pretty rough in the beginning, let's be honest. But things like the Clone Wars animated series have really helped to endear the characters, and just generally speaking, the behavior of people, the way George Lucas took it on the chin, criticism, and enrolled with it, I think endeared into people, the way the actors have behaved, and so on and so forth. And plus, as much as I love the original trilogy, because I grew up with it in the 80s, it had a good world, very good world building. But if anything, the prequels had more world building. Kind of reminds me of Frank Herbert's Dune, the original book, if you read it. The original Dune had an amazing world with all kinds of lore and everything else. But the characters, the dialogue, were pretty shaky. And that was kind of common for 1950s and 60s sci-fi. It really wasn't until the 80s that character-driven sci-fi started to come out. And to some extent I would say Star Wars and the original Battlestar Galactica helped with that, as of course did Star Trek, which was always a character-driven piece, much more so once you get into Next Generation and DS9. So that really helped kind of propel sci-fi from the science end of things more into the drama end of things. So, yeah. With that said, let's try to take our first bite of this nutty turd. Plot. The Last Jedi had one. You might not like it, I might not like it, but it did have a plot, a message. Simplistic one, an incorrect one, but it had it. If you go back and look at Force Awakens, it didn't. Or rather, what it had, it stole from Episode 4. And it set up a bunch of stuff that if they'd actually had payoffs in mind, could have been cool. It would have been okay to start with the new sequel trilogy with kind of familiar ground, Episode 4, but set up some new twists and stuff and follow through with them. But as you know, now, they had no plan. They were just going to go film by film. And to be fair, that's okay. While George Lucas kind of mapped out the prequels as a trilogy from the beginning, so they kind of follow on to each other, the original trilogy, not so much. The first film was expected to be standalone, but they left the door open for a sequel. Originally, that could have been what we know today as Splinter is the Mind's Eye, but because the first film did so much better than expected, they had a bigger budget, and you had Empire Strikes Back. So, while the first film, Episode 4, is self-contained, they intentionally left the door open for sequels, and they took advantage of that quite well. I mean, most people say Empire is the best. And obviously, Empire ended with a clear nod to Return of the Jedi coming. I mean, it was clear that it was coming. But it's also clear they didn't quite have everything planned out yet. The biggest thing that comes to mind is the whole Luke, Leia, sister twist thing in Episode 6. So, yeah, it's clear that 6 was kind of written and filmed after 5, that they weren't written together. Either that or George Lucas likes incestuous kisses. Yeah, whatever. It was in Back to the Future, too. But Force Awakens, we know its failings. It didn't really have much original to say. It did have good dialogue. It had purportedly good special effects. I mean, the actors were well cast as far as that goes. But it was all style, no substance. And then we get to Rise of Skywalker. It has no plot. At most, and the people have said this, and it's absolutely true, it's a video game plot. A to B to C, level here, level there, obtain this, go to this level, meet this character, go there. Mostly it's just such a freaking frantic pace. And not knowing really, I think at this point it was just, hey, let's get this done with. There was no clear plot. And as we know, Palpatine was just thrown in at the last minute because Snoke was gone. And of course that was the fault of The Last Jedi. But, hey, they're the ones who gave Rian Johnson free reign to do what he wanted and approved it. They could have ixnayed it. They could have hired one director for all 3 films or mapped it out. He didn't make the choice to make these individual films. And to be fair, I don't hate his direction. I think he would have done okay in a standalone film like Solo, where you do have comedy and stuff and a social message. I think he was miscast as the director, but he could have done well in something else, standalone. Because it's clear he had a story he wanted to tell. And it was not the story that was begun with Force Awakens. But at least there was a story. And he probably delivered the only surprising twist in the entire sequel trilogy. I mean, Han being killed in Episode 7, nothing there. The whole thing's in Episode 9 with Palpatine and everything. No surprises. No one gave a shit. Yeah, Kylo killing Snoke. Yeah, that was unexpected. Yeah, I'll give it that. That was unexpected. So, yeah. And the way Luke behaved. Certainly unexpected. Not well liked, but unexpected. And even Yoda coming back was a much more welcome cameo than, say, Luke coming back in Episode 9. Like I said, I feel like there was at least a message and intent behind the film that the other 2 in the sequel trilogy were just totally lacking. I mean, You know what I mean? We don't have to like something, but at least there's a message there. And the dialogue, even if we don't like the words, it's delivered quite well. The actors do play off of each other well. I think everyone would agree that Mark Hamill's performance was entertaining as all hell. I think everyone wanted more of him. And that was really the film that, kind of brought Adam Driver out. When Force Awakens came out, people didn't really comment on him a whole lot. At least not compared to after 8. So they brought those people to the fore. They didn't do what I wanted with them, but they did bring them out to the fore. It's just a shame that Rian Johnson has literally zero idea of military tactics, how militaries work, anything to do with that, anything to do with the Star Wars mechanics, the Star Wars universe, fuel. Anyway, I'm going to stop there. My point is, yeah, Force Awakens turned into a hollow shell once Episode 8 came out. Because if Episode 8 had followed on to Episode 7, as if they had a plan, man, snap, that could have been great. But when it was revealed that there was no plan, 7 kind of looked empty and pointless, mystery boxes. And 9 looked like an obligation to get through. It's something they had to do because they promised it, not because they really had a message or a story to tell. That means only 8 is left out of the sequel trilogy with anything like a cohesive message. And it does have a beginning, a middle, and an end. Of course, that's part of the problem. Just as Episode 7 left the door wide open for 8, 8 closed not only the door, but every window for 9. But it did have a definitive ending. I will give it that. Also, I love the Chewie roasting a porg scene. I just wish he would have looked at him, shrugged, and taken a big old bite, and then had a big old shit-eating grin with a peanut in his teeth. Let's move on. Characters. And they didn't know what the hell they were doing with any of the sequels. They knew they wanted Mark Hamill, Carrie Fisher, and of course Harrison Ford back. Beyond that, they didn't know. And they knew they wanted a younger cast. And it needed to be diverse. Okay, fine. I think everyone would agree that John Boyega is a really good actor, and seemingly a really good person. But they didn't know what they wanted to do with any of them. They got him, and then they didn't know. I think the only thing they knew about Harrison Ford, yeah, we're going to kill him. Fair enough. And he's going to have a kid. And that really, really comes across. There's just so little characterization in Episode 7. I don't know. And then the way they just throw Lando and Palpatine in Episode 9. And if Lando was going to be there, he should have been there from the beginning. And I hate how people just seem like they were stuck in stasis for 30 years. And everything has been reset. I mean, look at Han Solo. No progression. All the lessons he learned from the original trilogy. And then he's just back to being not even a good smuggler. Chewie's still hanging out there doing Chewie things. Would it have not been more entertaining to see Han and Leia, an old married couple, bickering, but in love? Because you know that's what they'd be. They bicker all the time. But it'd be great to see those two play off each other. And give Chewie the Millennium Falcon. Have him cruising around in a Wookiee-maintained Falcon. That'd be great. Lando could be doing something on the side. And, send Luke off doing Luke things. He was kind of a loner anyway. But so much potentiality there that was wasted. And not just with the old characters, but with the new ones, too. They didn't know what they wanted to do. They wanted a black stormtrooper. Beyond that, they didn't know. Had no clue at all. That's the definition of racism, frankly. When you're literally judging someone by their race and not anything else. And they wanted a female lead. No problem at all there. But what to do with her? I didn't know. Nothing too terribly interesting. And as far as I understand, Poe wasn't even supposed to be a main character. He was supposed to die off, but he was so popular, they brought him around, and I think everyone likes him, but just there. Sorry about that. Phone ring. But yeah, they didn't know what they wanted to do. And kind of the same with the villain. I don't know, you know what I mean. This has all been hashed in years. But my point is, at least with The Last Jedi, there was a clear character written for Luke and a clear arc. Again, we don't like it at all. But at least he's a hermit, he's doing his thing, he's grumpy. We find out why he's grumpy. Then he goes to try to save everyone at the end with his laser sword. I do like that one phrase. And that's the thing. His individual dialogue is quite snappy. If you listen to the dialogue in a vacuum of Episode 8, some of it's really good, especially Skywalker's. It may not be fitting for Luke Skywalker, but whatever. It's more interesting than things that Han and Leia say in Episode 7. But at least his dialogue, because he does have some moments that I really enjoy, and he gets to act a bit, and so on and so forth. So there is that, and they do attempt to give Finn something to do in Episode 8. Not really a whole lot that's interesting, but more than Episode 9, to be fair. Yeah, and then of course Episode 9, there's nothing. It's just whatever. Very hollow, very vacuous. All these films are, frankly. They're very hollow. And that's really something we didn't expect from Star Wars. We expected maybe they'd be bad. Lots of people still think the prequels are bad. But at least they don't feel hollow. They have a heart. And they have a message. And they had an idea of who their characters were. Stilted dialogue and all. These films don't. And as time went on, it really started to show. When I came out of watching Force Awakens, I was reasonably happy. But, of course, the biggest sin in that film was the fact that the three never got to be together. And I'm sure the idea was to bring them all together in Episode 9. Here's the thing, when you're dealing with older people, don't count on that. As everyone learned to their grief when Carrie Fisher died. So the one chance we had to have all three back together, plus, Chewie and R2. And that's another thing, the way they used R2 and C3, it's just bleh. But to waste that opportunity, and that was not Episode 8's fault, that was Episode 7's, to not do that. Yep. Very sad stuff there. But anyway, when I came out of Episode 7, I thought, well, if they follow through on what they've set up here, this could be good. Maybe not amazing, but, the prequels set a relatively low bar. Let's see where we're going, give them time to find their feet. As much as I do like Episode 4, I would say it's the weakest of the three original films. I know that would get me, stoned online, and not in a good way. But back in the day in the 80s, that was kind of the consensus, that they got better. That Empire was the best, followed by Jedi, followed by the original. And not because it was bad, but because it was the first. The actors were learning the roles. If you really just think about the Force in Episode 4, it's pretty limited. So I don't really mind expanding Force powers as long as they're logical enough. But anyway. But these just got progressively weirder and less focused and less Star Wars. Again, Episode 7 tried to ape Episode 4, which never works out great. Episode 8 did its thing, but it didn't feel Star Wars. It did feel like a film, though, which is more than I can say for Episode 9, which just felt like an obligation. It felt like an art project turned in at the last minute, done on the last minute, just because it had to be done for a grade. There was no heart, there was no substance, and the plot was just nothing. It was just video game plot. It was just contrivance and this and that and little snippy scenes threaded together like a patchwork quilt. So I'll take 8 over that. And because nothing was really followed up by Episode 7, who cares? All those mystery boxes are just empty boxes with nothing in them, no point. So without that mystery that Episode 7 kind of had, who are these people? What happened? Knowing that there's no grand story behind all this that'll be told later, Episode 7 just completely falls apart. And Episode 9 is such a jumbled mess. That only means Episode 8's left, is anything like a coherent, cohesive movie. For better or worse. Mostly for worse, but there we go, folks. Vehicle design. Since I've been covering various little Hot Wheels and some, well, I guess for Last Jedi it would be just the Hot Wheels, I have an idea of what some of the stuff looks like. Obviously, before, I didn't know what the craft looked like from not only The Last Jedi, but also Force Awakens. But after handling these, I have to say that The Last Jedi does the best job of having its own unique identity, pushing things forward. The original trilogy did a good job of introducing new craft as much as it could, but it was limited in scope because they were working with practical models, and those are very expensive. So we pretty much had the same Star Destroyer from from the beginning to the end, but we did get the Executor, we did get the Mon Cal Cruiser, and each we had a total of like 4 different fighters: TIE Advance, TIE Interceptor, TIE Bomber. Kind of getting a couple with each new film. You get one. The same with that, and of course, Empire. You get the Snow Speeder, and Return of the Jedi. You get the B-wing and the A-wing. So they give you some new things as much as they could. But the prequels, my goodness, because they were working with CGI, they were able to do a lot. And that only continued with the Clone Wars, so we got lots of stuff. And that's one thing George Lucas did, though. When he got new designs, he was really good, or at least his design department was really good at both moving things forward into unique direction, while still making them fit not only into the universe, but into a design lineage, like, say, Incom. You can kind of tell an Incom craft, even though it's fictional, from, say, CNR fleet systems, and vice versa. Each manufacturer that's set up kind of has its own style, which is awesome. But they're unique, they're different. But then you get to Force Awakens, and you have the T-70 X-Wing that looks almost identical to the original T-65. You have the First Order TIE Fighter, which looks identical to the Imperial TIE Fighter. And probably the biggest sin of all, you have the TIE Special Forces, the 2-seater, that still looks near identical. Okay, fine, if you want to keep the regular TIE looking the same, great, lineage type thing. But then get a little fun with the 2-seater. Or heck, even base it on like the TIE Bomber or Interceptor. Do something different. And they didn't. Of course, they reused the Millennium Falcon. They do have a Star Destroyer. It's okay. It's different enough to kind of pass muster. But yeah, it's a little underwhelming in that department. And then you get to Rise of Skywalker, and they pretty much just gave up. They used original Star Destroyers. They used essentially original Y-wings with no real changes, B-wings. There's so little there in that film. But actually, Last Jedi, while it does reuse some stuff, for example, the A-wing featured in it is pretty similar. But you do have some kind of neat new things. For example, the TIE Silencer flown by Kylo Ren. It definitely harkens. It's basically a cross between a TIE Interceptor and a TIE Advanced, but it also has a different shape cockpit. It is different. Yeah, I think it fits into the lineage, and they kind of talk about stealth design and stuff, which is kind of how the real world went. So, yeah, it makes perfect sense. Of course, we still have the T-70 X-Wing, but we do have those little ski speeders, which I actually think are really cool. It's a neat little design, kind of asymmetrical, funky, but somehow very Star Wars. I mean, what they did in the film was trash because, yeah. But I do like the design. Speaking of, I actually like the Star Fortress bomber design. That concept Again, it kind of plays heed because it's supposed to be from the same manufacturer as the B-Wing. So it definitely has those nods. But it is different. It kind of looks like a B-Wing and a Nebulon B frigate had a little baby. It's kind of in between. And we don't see a lot of mid-scale craft in Star Wars. Either they're little snub fighters or they're huge capital ships. So that was nice. Of course, the way they use the bombers in the film, complete trash. Absolutely complete trash. You can sit here for an hour nitpicking. Long story short, to me, the whole idea of these bombers just being taken out by flying wings in space and, a few shots, that's absurd. Because if you're going to have something like that, they take some punishment. You would be amazed how much punishment a World War II B-17 Flying Fortress could take. Amazed. Or even the B-29s. These planes could take a licking, and that was the whole point. So yeah, trash use, but I actually really like those designs. So when I think about it, design-wise, it's the best. Plus, they didn't reuse the frickin' Death Star. That was good. The Guerrilla Walkers, I'm okay on. They're different enough. And to be fair, ground units like tanks don't necessarily change all that much. If you look at various tank evolutions, you're going to have a turret, tracks. So I can kind of give it a pass that these are going to have a head, a body, the 4 legs. Again, kind of meh, but okay, whatever. The competition is not very high here when we're comparing these 3 films. So yeah, design-wise for the vessels, I do think the better ones are in this film. World building. And that's really what Star Wars has kind of always been about. In Episode 4, it's all built. Of course, we get Tatooine, we get Yavin, and we get the Death Star. Those are kind of their major locations, plus the Millennium Falcon. Those are major sets and scenes. And then, of course, in Empire Strikes Back, we get probably some of the absolute best and most memorable areas. We have Hoth, we have Dagobah, and we have Cloud City, which is, I think, the coolest, because the idea of a city wafting about in a gas giant is actually very spacey. We also get several scenes on board a Star Destroyer, which we never really saw in Episode 4. So, 3 or 4 new scenes. Return of the Jedi, okay, we go back to Tatooine, but we see a very different side of it, the gangster side, not the farming side, and I like the Jabba the Hutt scenes. Okay, we go back to Dagobah, but we're there very briefly, and then we have a few scenes on a Mon Cal cruiser, and then we go to the Redwood Forest in Washington State and meet little bears. Not as diverse, frankly, whatever. And then, of course, we have the Death Star, which the throne room is probably the most iconic set, maybe the sail barge, in that film. Yeah, okay, so Return of the Jedi is maybe the weakest when it comes to locales, but it was supposed to be the 3rd final film. Then we get into the prequels, and it really opens up. We have all kinds of new places. Okay, Naboo is kind of idealistic, but then we have Mustafar, we have Geonosis, we have Coruscant, neat settings. What about the sequel trilogy? Well, Episode 7 gives us Tatooine again. Okay, they call it Jakku, but yeah, it's Tatooine. We get a snow planet, but it's actually just a big Death Star, so we're using the Death Star. And then we have a few other here and there places like Maz Kanata's castle, whatever. And the major ship we see is, whoop-de-doo, the Millennium Falcon again. It's reusing, for the most part. Very little thought put into the locations. Very little world building. Even places like Maz Kanata's castle, they're not very fleshed out at all. Frankly, Episode 9, I don't know, I don't care. It's just blah, 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 blah. I really hate that film. It's so just mediocre milquetoast. What about Last Jedi? Maybe it tries. It's the best I can say. Canto Bight was terrible, but at least it was trying a setting. Johnson tried to build a world there. We didn't like it, but he tried, which is more than I can say for 7 or 9. Nowhere near what we saw in the original 6 Star Wars films, but it was there. Crate, and Salt Planet, what have you. You know, it's funny. A salt would actually make sense because if you had oceans at one time and then the oceans dried up, you would have salt left over. So it's kind of a dead planet in that sense. And so it makes sense that a derelict, falling apart rebel base would be there. I actually like this setting, and I wish we had more time there because it's very haunting. A desolate, dead area. I think there's a world there to be explored. So, even though I don't like one of the 2 main locations, at least there's something there that was tried. I would rather see a filmmaker try and fail, like Last Jedi, than either just not try at all, or just throw it all together, like the 2 J.J. Abrams. So I have to give a little credit where it's due there. Again, I don't really like a lot of it, but yeah, and that kind of goes hand in glove with, like I said, design and stuff of the vessels and things. It just seems like there's an effort to build the world. Now, what drives me crazy about the sequel trilogy, the galaxy feels so small. This is a problem with J.J. Abrams films in general, but it feels empty, void, depressing. Like there's only, it kind of feels like Firefly a bit. Like it's just a few systems settled and they're outposts, and this is kind of an answer. I almost have the feeling like at the center of the galaxy, because we never see Coruscant, that everything's running fine back at Coruscant. And it's just all this crap's happening on a tiny part of the outer rim. And if that were the case, in a little microcosm, that would be fine. Because, let's be honest, the First Order and the Resistance feel tiny. The Resistance is smaller than the Rebellion, which was not very big to begin with. And while the Empire was big, it had a whole galaxy to police, so it was spread thin. The First Order, it feels like they have maybe a couple of dozen Star Destroyers. And it feels like there's only a few star systems in the galaxy. Like everyone else just kind of like went to sleep. It feels very sleepy. But I will say this. In Force Awakens, people get from point A to point B like that. At least in Last Jedi, there's a sense of space, of movement, of distance. Now, granted, it's that stupid Mon Cal cruiser, the Radis chase, where they're running out of fuel, but at least it lasts for a good duration of the film, and you actually feel like they're going somewhere, like there's space between the star systems. When in the JJ films, it just feels like they're literally next door. I have to wonder if these directors comprehend the first thing about space. Like, literally how huge it is. I mean, if you go to Episode 4, it takes the Millennium Falcon time to get to Alderaan. And then it takes time to get to Yavin. And of course, in The Empire Strikes Back, when the Falcon's hyperdrive is damaged, it takes them weeks or months even, maybe to get to Bespin. And of course, we see Luke training at the same time on Dagobah. There's at least that feeling of space, of distance there. Of course, it has to be compressed because it's a show, but a movie or a TV has to do. But at least there's that sense of, hey, it took us a day, it took us 2 days to get there, what have you. And I really appreciate that. And that's really what's lacking in a lot of the stuff. And when you do that, it just makes everything feel small and insignificant. And everything really does feel small and insignificant in the sequel trilogy. Whereas the original 2 trilogies, everything feels, well, galaxy-wide, because it is. And you have big, larger-than-life personalities to fill it. And not so much in the sequels. So, final thoughts, conclusion. Again, this just kind of came about by a funny thought a few months ago now. And just kind of looking back how Even though Episode 8 might be a very, very bad Star Wars film, it's actually the only one of the three that's a halfway decent film. The others are just nothing. And that's fine. I don't have a lot of emotional attachment to properties. I have my childhood, that's fine. The originals still mean a lot to me. Same thing goes for Star Trek these days. That I don't get invested in this stuff. If I like it, I like it. If I don't, I don't. I move along. There's plenty of entertainment out there, plenty of things I like. And I just don't really get worked up over it, one way or the other. That's fine. They're just actors doing an acting gig. I remember reading the Thrawn trilogy when that came out. What was that, 1991? I really enjoyed it. I think most of us would have preferred they kind of went in that direction. But they didn't. And it's obvious that corporations, if you want to hear me really rail on things, it can be about firearms, it can be about entertainment, it can be about product. I really just do not like big business. I even actually blame it for a lot of the political problems we have these days. I just think, monopolies have always been a threat in this nation, and now we have ginormous ones. I'm very much in favor of free market capitalism, all that, but that's small, medium, and traditional big business. Not international. I mean, what we have today, they're not even monopolies, they're umbrella corporations. And, it doesn't matter. But that's what happens. I mean, some people criticize George Lucas in the prequels for being surrounded by yes men. Well, he was surrounded by employees. In a way. And sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. But on the other hand, you really can't design a piece of art by committee, by survey, by census, or you'll end up with the Disney films. It just won't work. And we're seeing that now. It's not just Star Wars we're having this trouble with. But we'll see how it all ends. It doesn't really, again, it's interesting enough to me, but emotionally, it doesn't really bother me. I was, of course, saddened by Carrie Fisher's death, and Mark Hamill's quite entertaining as he is. Harrison Ford, well, he's mostly stoned all the time. That's cool. You do you, man. And I wish everyone that worked on it a good career. Yeah, just because I don't like a lot of the stuff in the film doesn't mean I'm insulting people like Rian Johnson. Love it or hate it, he at least put hard work into it, and I can respect that. Whatever. I'm not a big fan of the J.J. Abrams Star Trek films, but I just move on with life. But since I have been talking about the little Star Wars ships from Hot Wheels, just thought I'd mention it. And it's funny because I had this realization earlier this year that, of the three sequels, if that's all you're comparing it to, it probably is the best one. It's the best turd in the toilet bowl. For whatever that's worth. Yay. We'll see. I think it's telling that the most successful Star Wars in recent history has been the Clone Wars. And while cinema is good, there has been kind of a push more to serial storytelling and more of a TV thing. A lot of the emphasis really has moved from theaters and big studio stuff to TV stuff, which the reason I like TV stuff, at least traditionally, it focuses more on writing, more on character, more on plot, and less on special effects. I can't imagine why I don't care much about those, can you? So anyway, let me know what you think, or not. Just thought I'd make another black box for you. Appreciate you hanging out, staying with me. If you could, like, share, and subscribe. This is Misha, and I'll catch you very soon. Nut time.